Hey there, I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Cities which flourish often owe much of their success to a careful balance amongst progressive leadership, policy, and execution. Not to be forgotten, however, is a careful recognition and measured approach towards sustaining what positively defines a locale and delivers benefit and reward to its citizenry. All of this, of course, is easier said than done. Present-day complexities of managing the interests of millions have an innate way of throwing wrenches into the maintenance of a city as a whole and its assets. Take the example of a metropolis defined by an industry such as film and television production. Overseeing a city based around a sector like that can be both a real opportunity and challenge for a multitude of reasons. Our guest today knows a thing or two about all of this. In essence, one of his major roles is acting as an intermediary, attempting to balance the needs of a globally renowned city up against the wants of an industry which contributes billions of dollars to their local economy. All right, welcome to the show. So Geoff Teoli is the film commissioner of the third largest motion picture production center in all of North America, Vancouver, BC. He's a highly collaborative motion picture and television executive focused on supporting industry priorities of workforce development, sustainability, and infrastructure investments that build and support the film industry in Vancouver. A mere sampling of his duties and experiences include attracting high-impact investment initiatives on the city's behalf to developing and executing strategic plans right on through to technology transformation and change management. Now, much of Geoff's passion towards work stems from his belief that a strong creative sector, and I love this, is at the heart of all great cities, driving innovation, growth, and high-paying jobs. In his words, the film industry pushes the creative economy beyond traditional industry boundaries into tourism, arts and culture, digital entertainment, and gaming, and countless other indirect beneficiaries. In addition to his deep industry knowledge and multi-tiered experiences accrued across and over the past 2 decades working within the sector, Geoff holds an MBA from the Beatty School of Business at Simon Fraser University, as well as certificates in integrated management, strategic leadership, and entertainment law from the University of British Columbia. And Geoff is also equipped with a Diploma of Technology, as well as Marketing Management Technology from British Columbia Institute of Technology. So with all that stated, Geoff, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the program. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Really excited about this talk.
Yeah, as am I. I've seen a lot of your work before, and I'm really honored to be here.
Yeah, thanks. Well, in the spirit of things, why don't we get started here? And I do have a first segment lined up, something called Coloring Wikipedia. It's a segment where I just read off a definition of what a guest does, or sometimes their industry. Now, unfortunately, when I went to Wikipedia, I didn't actually see a write-up for your position as a film commissioner. However, they did have something there that we can work with. They had film commission. So I'm just going to read that off. And within the context of all that you do, all that you have done, and probably what you will be doing in the future, maybe you could comment on that after and see how well it measures up. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. So here we go. Film commission. Film commissions are organized by local government bodies together with non-profit organizations and the like, and serve as the administrative window concerned with attracting and supporting the productions that come to their locality, not only from other parts of their own countries, but from abroad as well. Film commissions believe that by attracting productions to their area, they can provide direct economic benefit through rental of hotel rooms, locations, vehicles, etc., and indirect benefit by the increased exposure of appearing in films and television. So a little bit general, I suppose, but at first take, what do you think of that?
A couple thoughts on that. And before I answer that question, I actually wanted to acknowledge the fact that I am here in Vancouver, which is on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. The people that have been here for time immemorial and stewards of the land, and as a descendant of settlers, being able to live here in this part of the world, it's really an honor and privilege to be able to be here and speak to you from this part of the world today. So, and I just wanted to acknowledge that fact. It's really important for us here to recognize that.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. Thank you.
And Yeah, you're welcome. So to your question, I think there's two things. So I think the base description is pretty close. In one thing that I noticed is missing is the word jobs. That kind of stood out to me. So in my role, I think about jobs a lot. And I would say that the other part that's not missing, but I think that is a type of film commission. There's another type. I put film commissions around the world, and there's hundreds of them, into kind of two buckets.
Okay.
That definition is the bucket of mostly about investment attraction. Often that's a new territory that's trying to start up in the sector, or maybe they have a small sector and they want to grow it. So a lot of that's about investment attraction. And then you have the other bucket, which is, Vancouver, Toronto, LA, New York, London. They already have a decades-long established sector, and the focus of that has been shifted, and the balance has gone away from investment attraction. Not that that's not still part of the job, much more into production support and service, maintaining that reputation. You spend decades building a reputation that filmmakers want to come. They know in the global market, everybody knows where these cities are and what they offer.
Right.
So our film commission in Vancouver, for example, I would say is in more the later definition, where it is more about sustained service, jobs, economy.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. And I would suspect as well that perhaps some of those mature sort of markets that like Vancouver, New York, and some of the other ones that you referenced are also probably transitioning towards like being even more progressive. They don't have to attract people necessarily, like I said, like the landmarks necessarily. Everybody knows about those things. It's some of the other perhaps policies that are in place that might be attractive to film companies that have particular passions within, say, sustainability, or some of these other areas, or maybe it's technological advancements that you're pushing forward. Perhaps we're going to get into all of this later on today, but
I'm sure we will. Yeah,
I'm guessing that's part of it as well, or am I into something there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that it's a very dynamic industry, and the organizations that work in it and serve it, including film commissions, have to be dynamic. The cities that and we'll get into this a little bit later on, the cities that succeed really well are also able to respond to that in a way that we'll get into the question about change management later, but it is a mindset that a city has to be able to manage, right?
Okay. Well, to paint an even clearer picture of what you do, I suppose, in your role, what would be a typical day? I know it's a difficult question because probably there aren't too many difficult days, I'd imagine, in a position like that in which you're holding, but maybe a brief overview of what takes your time.
Yeah. Typical day or typical kind of week is, a lot of the work that I'm doing now in the film commissioner role is related to, as I said, like that sustaining the success of everything that's preceded me. One, for example, area that we've been very successful at and I spend a lot of my time on every week, often every day, is in relation to sustainability, and more specifically on how to get the film industry to be able to help it achieve its goal of getting off of the use of diesel generators. As an example. So fossil fuel use is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gases, and one of the carbon footprint of a film production is related to fuel. So, a lot of my work every day goes into that. Emerging issues related to workforce development, diversity, equity, inclusion, and reconciliation as well is, again, kind of part of almost the daily conversation. Those are the two big priorities. There's still work related to investment attraction. We still do get call, even though everyone knows about Vancouver. What that means is that anyone who's thinking about getting into the sector, say, for example, a big investment firm, real estate investment firm that maybe is not in the area, but maybe they've had some success in setting up a studio in another part of the world, like LA, and they want to expand, they're almost immediately going to look around the world, like where is the business? Right. The big difference between what we're talking about before, the two different types of commission, is I don't have to go down to LA and tell them, hey, we're here, think about us. It's often they will contact us and say, we've heard Vancouver is a great place to set up shop. Tell us why.
Fill us in. Give it to
validate. So that's the investment traction part of it. That's a big part of it. I have an amazing team within the city of Vancouver on the operational side, so I'm not too involved in day-to-day operations. We put out 3 to 4 film permits a day.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty significant and high volume. If there's a big troubleshooting issue, I'll get pulled into it. But for the most part, I've got a really great team
Yeah.
within the city, so things run pretty smoothly there. And government relations, we are a municipality, so we also have to maintain our relationships and ties and working hand in hand with other jurisdictions. There's the province of BC, there's the federal government, there's also, the organizations like the Health and Safety, WorkSafe BC, got kind of regulatory bodies. So there's a lot of kind of work on that. Example like with COVID, all of those groups had to come together to figure out how are we going to get the industry through this and to the other side. So there's a lot of that kind of collaboration with different government agencies. Like in the province, we actually have a provincial film commission. So there's provincial and regional and municipal, and so
a
all
lot of
that
stakeholders.
Yeah. A lot of meetings.
Yeah, You probably had your fill of Zoom meetings the last
for sure.
few years here.
Process improvement. It's one of the things I've always I can't look at anything without thinking about how can I make it better. And that's one of the things that a mature film commission has to always be thinking about, is how do we make the user experience for our clients better. If we put out a permit now with 3 days notice and an online application, are there steps in that online application that we can improve on? And we're always trying to think about that. So a lot of that process improvement piece comes along with it as well when you're in this type of market, where it's just more like sustaining the success and staying ahead of the competition in a way, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, it sounds like you're wearing a lot of different hats, to put it mildly. Quite a few different hats, quite a few different responsibilities.
Yeah, it keeps it very interesting. Yeah.
I was about to say, the course of doing this program and interviewing people like yourself, from around the world, that would seem to be one of the patterns, though, of fulfillment, or at least, for a lot of people, is that the more hats that they're wearing, of course, stress levels can go up and there can be challenging moments. I'm not discounting any of that, but at the same time too, I think it also offers this reward, and also allowing opportunities to step outside of one world or one sphere of your job and then into another. And it kind of, in a way, keeps things fresh, I would suspect. And maybe that's the case for you too, but
I would, without going it too much further, because it would take up the whole day talking about it. But one of the things I love about the film industry is there, and the roles I've always had in them, is there are these two worlds. There's the film industry world, and then there's the real world, as we sometimes would call it, when I was in the industry, and vice versa. And being able to kind of flow in between those worlds, be able to kind of go over or under the wall, because very different worldviews, is really exciting. And it's certainly something that I enjoy doing. Not everybody likes that; they like one worldview or the other. I like being able to kind of go back and forth.
It sounds invigorating to me. That's the way I'm taking that. All right, excellent. Well, I would like to transition into a new segment here, and this is actually a brand new segment for the show, for Life as a, and it's something called Pathways. And it's actually the theme of the questions coming into this segment aren't new, but it's related to this idea of pathways, career pathways. And a lot of times I think people believe that, especially youth, they think that, it's like this linear straight line, this is my dream when you're in your 20s or whatever, teens, and this is the job that I want. And most people just go straight towards it and everything works out perfectly. But again, in the course of running this show, I know that's not the case. It's usually left-hand turn, zigging and zagging and so on and so forth. So in the spirit of that, I think it'd be really interesting to dive into your history a little bit here. Like, how did you end up in this position? What was your path, essentially? If you could give a brief overview of that.
I love this segment, and because you've touched on something that I think is part of my pathway, is of the two you described, the latter. Right? I did not ever think about getting in this industry. I kind of just fell into it, and interesting enough is I have family in the industry that have been in it longer than I have, and I have a aunt here in Vancouver who's a makeup artist. I have a cousin who's a director, based out of Toronto, very prolific. And when I was younger and I was going through BCIT and my business management program, they said I'd come out of that and I wasn't finding jobs that I was really satisfied with. Most of them were in sales and things like that. So I went back to working at the bar, in the bartending, and
It's a bit of a left-hand turn there. There we go.
Yeah. Well, a couple entrepreneurial endeavors that racked up the credit cards and didn't go anywhere.
Okay. Yeah.
So, but every time they would bring this up, I'm like, I'm not a creative. I'm management, I'm business and stuff like that. And eventually, my aunt convinced me to come to a wrap party at her house, and it was after a little Canadian show called Madison at the time. It was kind of a Canadian 90210, and I didn't know anybody there, so I sat down on the sofa, and there were some people sitting beside me, and they asked what I was doing, and I told them, not much, and trying to figure that out. And when they heard what I did, they said, you should go, get in the film industry. And I same thing. I'm like, I'm not a creative. It's not for me. And they're like, no, there's this whole business side. It's show business. It's 2 words, show business. And they told me a little bit about what they did. They were assistant directors, which are kind of like, manage the set, manage the schedule. And so after, didn't take me long, like 48 hours of research. I'm like, okay, well, why not? And so I went down to the Directors Guild, which is the guild that manages, location managers, ADs, production managers, management, and signed up and started getting some work, and really quickly kind of advanced. And suddenly, like 20 years later, I'm
here you are.
I'm top of my game, and looking back at 20 years of prolific career, no intention originally at all. Right.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
And that was the first half of my career. And then, after that, I did start to kind of get a bit of burnout after 20 years, and I was looking for something a little bit more, a change, I would say. And then I started becoming purposeful. So it was when I was young, I was like, just go with the flow, figure it out. As I went through my career and age, I started becoming like, I need to be more purposeful. And so that's when I started the transition out of production and into more executive roles, and how I landed in that part. And so where I went from leaving production in 2013 to now, every step of the way was, planned and purposeful. So I got I've been both,
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. That's really interesting, actually, considering it that way, where you never know initially. I think in your youth, like you have a rough idea where you might want to go sometimes, and then sometimes in your case, I love that story where you really didn't know, and it just sort of comes up through conversations. You meet this person, that person. And I think the key oftentimes is just keeping that that mindset of just being open to possibility and listening and investigating. So I think that's probably the first true gem of this conversation. I think for listeners who are still somewhat undecided about what their past might be, or might be stressed out about them, I think that is a really useful bit of information. So okay, well, excellent. I think it's turned out fairly well for you.
I'd say.
Yeah. Alrighty, well, maybe we can move into another segment here, and we can just kind of continue this back and forth. It's a Q&A discovery. And in researching for this talk, I came across so many illustrative stats in terms of the city of Vancouver, in terms of the scale and importance of the film and television industry to that city itself. I eventually settled on a few stats here via the Vancouver Economic Commission. You're probably well familiar with these, but for listeners, I just want to really quickly read them off. So here goes. On average, the city is home to approximately 65 plus movies and 55 TV series annually, as well as hundreds of other filming days for commercials, TV pilots, and other features. That unto itself kind of speaks volumes to the value that this whole industry brings to the city itself. And I'd love to know, what do you attribute both this scale and success to? What has made Vancouver, what it is within this industry? Why has it been able to achieve such levels of success and sustain it?
So I think, we talk about something at the Vancouver Economic Commission. They call it the 3 T's. Okay. And one of them is the tax credits. So I'll get that out of the way first of all, we have a tax credit program. Almost every jurisdiction that wants to attract filming has some type of tax credit program. Right. And so I'd say we have a well-established, very strong tax credit program that is essentially money in the bank for the producers. It's if you get pre-qualified for this, you get it. You can actually use it as collateral to get some film financing, that type of thing. It's so well respected and established. It is not like the highest percentage. You go around the world and see someone offers this, there's a competition. I'll give you 30%. I'll give you 40%. Right. I'll give it on your labor. I'll give it on your, and there's all these different varieties of different programs. Some of them have caps. We'll give you this percentage, but only up to X number of dollars, or we'll give it to you, some people, but not everybody. So there's a lottery. We do none of that. It's like the standards are pretty simple. You get it, and there's no cap. And so they often, the numbers on the surface don't mean much. But people know that we have a really good program, and it
works,
trusted.
It works and it's trusted. Okay.
You don't want to count on something like that and then find out a couple of years later there's been a change in government and suddenly they don't want to do it anymore, right? That can destroy all the efforts to build up an industry.
Stability.
And that's all I'll say about tax credits, because I think that there's a whole bunch of other factors, because everyone has tax credits. So why does Vancouver do well, right? And I think it's on the other aspects of it. So time zone. That's something none of us really control, but we are in LA time zone. And as long as LA is the center of the filmmaking universe, the closer you are and the easier it is to do business, goes back to, it's easy to do business in your time zone. It's easy to fly. It's less than a 3-hour flight, right? And there's many flights per day on many different airlines. So, it's, again, ease of doing business. That certainly helps. And then, going back to what I started off with, the talent, the jobs, 5 decades, we're now, seeing 3rd generation filmmakers that are in Vancouver, right? So, the grandchildren of people that started making filming years ago are starting to enter the industry. And so that depth of talent and knowledge is extremely valuable. And you hear producers say it all the time, like that they recognize the talent up here and the productivity of the talent. Call it a good Canadian work ethic or whatever you want, but like, you get your money's worth on your labor up here, and you get more than just your money's worth. You get creativity, talent, experience, and those across the board. And if there's a term in the film industry called above the line and below the line. I don't know if you've ever heard that. Essentially, below the line is kind of operational such, and everything above is often your key creatives, your directors, your cast, your producers, but in all aspects of that now. So Vancouver used to be more on the below the line area. Now we have a lot more cast, directors, producers that have a lifetime and sometimes multi-generations of experience. So that would be the 3 T's. The other thing is we have an incredibly strong industry association. And which brings together all, like, many stakeholders, from producers and employers to US studios to the unions to the vendors who rent air conditioners to lighting equipment to like everybody. And I think one of the things that in anywhere in the world, if you look at an industry cluster or super cluster, you're going to find really strong industry associations. That's one of those indicators, economic indicators you look for. Is it a place that's going to have a cluster is going to have industry associations, and the stronger and the bigger they are, the more likelihood that cluster is going to be stronger and bigger. So there's to me that, and I think that's one of the secret sauces in Vancouver. Unfortunately, like a lot of other jurisdictions are starting to figure that out. So I'm watching and listening to what everyone's doing. A lot of them are trying to set up their own industry association. And actually, I shouldn't say unfortunately. I think it's for the better of the industry as a whole, growing the pie as a whole. People are seeing what we're doing, and I think that's the other aspect of Vancouver, which is kind of interesting. I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years is we used to watch what other people did and then emulate. I've seen that turn around now, and so Vancouver now is a place where other people look to. What are we doing, and how can we copy that success story? So that's pretty. To me, that's really, really cool. Like,
that's a mark, right? That is a mark right there. And I had a guest on not too long ago. Somebody that you're well familiar with, Clara George. TV producer who's turned sustainability consultant, and that was one of the discussion points in terms of what we were speaking of relating to sustainability, and how Vancouver's really become this model that a lot of other major locations, whether it be LA, whether it be London, New York, elsewhere, are trying to model some of their policies, the use of maybe electric generators, so on and so forth. And I think that speaks to that point. It really does sort of like mark the city as progressing to this next level, I suppose. And just listening to you in the last couple of minutes here, I think it also speaks to this point of just infrastructure of people, infrastructure of the systems of these organizations. It just seems like it's well established But not only that, continually evolving, which actually leads into my next question, if you don't mind,
Mhm.
which is Vancouver has sort of developed this image of this progressive city in a lot of different respects, even outside of film and television. But within that industry, in particular, I just mentioned sustainability, obviously like technology and so on and so forth. Here's the question in terms of that, like, how does the city keep up with all of that? And then the second part of this question, if you will, is how do you as a professional keep up with
Mhm.
all of that? Because it's a lot. I mean, just things we're lightly speaking of here, that there's some fairly deep issues that are going on and happening, and trying to keep that city positioned, in such a way that it is attractive. It
Mhm.
must be a bit of a challenge. And also to really quickly throw in that I know sometimes local governments and stakeholders have this penchant for moving a little bit slower, but
Mhm.
Vancouver's been a bit of the opposite in some respects, at least. But I'll let you take
Yeah.
it from
Um, well, I think Vancouver is, in many areas of its work, a progressive city,
there. Yeah.
and we certainly have some mandates that help and align really well with the film mandates, and that pushes things along a bit better. Related to our city was one of the first to declare a climate emergency back in 2018. We were one of the first cities maybe in the world to develop an UNDRIP strategy, that we just announced a week ago. And you know what UNDRIP is, the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People.
Okay.
There's a lot of progressive elements
Yeah.
to what we do here at the city, and that certainly helps. So that, again, that mindset of the city. As far as like how do we stay on top of it, I would say it goes back to what I was talking about before. Like, it is a lot of listening and paying attention in relationships. The industry association, for example, we're engaged a lot with them. I was just down in Los Angeles and they invited me to come down and speak on a couple of subjects. And that's just being in the room, listening to the conversations and understanding. I got to say, it doesn't hurt that I have 20 years of production experience, and so the relationships and the understanding that I have,
Mm-hmm.
that also helps me on coming into the city, because I've brought forth some ideas and said some things to my superiors that they've looked at me and said, your predecessors may have said the opposite, or that won't work. And um, you know, luckily I have again worked for really great people who,
Yeah.
if I say, trust me, whatever this thing is, the industry will find value in it. And it might seem risky to you,
Mm-hmm.
but the film industry will appreciate it or see value in it, and see it as low risk. So let's go for it and take a leap of faith. So there is a little bit of that happens, and I'm very great, fortunate that I have that experience to kind of lean on.
You can speak the language of both parties,
Yeah,
essentially, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
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 And I would say that also goes to, I'm fortunate that I work in a department of the city that works with an industry that is really progressive and agile and risk tolerant. So
Mm-hmm.
almost every initiative that we've been successful on, I struggle to claim even the majority of the credit, because the industry's told us they want this thing, and then my job is just kind of figure out how to make that happen.
Facilitate it. Yeah.
And
Okay.
and so my job is more like just kind of sitting back, putting together the pieces, and then coming up with a solution, a suggestion that, okay, you want this is the way we could do it.
Yeah.
Often that first attempt fails, and they're like, nah, change it, but it's very agile, it's very quick. And so when it comes to change management in government, there's often, you have to deal with the change management internally, which
Mm-hmm.
I would say is definitely also better in my department, maybe because I have a very agile group of people working with us in the film industry. It's just, it wears off on you, even if you're a bureaucrat.
It becomes
Yeah. But on the external side, we're working with an industry that does have a high risk tolerance, and that's not always the case. Sometimes you might be working with an industry that's a little bit, has a different worldview, a little bit more established. Maybe they're also a regulatory style of industry. So change is hard on both sides.
Yeah.
And so I think that I'm fortunate as well that I have an industry group that's very tolerant of some of the change and the risk that I'm willing to take.
Yeah, that point came up in conversation with Clara,
Yeah.
Clara Georgia, the producer, and she was talking about that in terms of that industry, film and television. Like, their history is built on finding another way. If they have a production shoot and suddenly the weather changes, they have to find another way to get this shot, to get it done. So it's almost like a culture issue within the industry where they're built to think, well, if I can't do this, then maybe I can do this, or this. And that sort of attitude, just that attitude by people and the players within that industry, yeah, that probably helps tremendously in terms of pushing forward,
Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
agendas. And
It
that's a
helped
really good
tremendously
point.
during COVID. It was one of the first and fastest industries to recover. I think,
Yeah.
because of that mindset. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of all of this for you, how is it for you and keeping up with it all? Is that, you know, I'm going to use this word again, invigorating? I mean, there must be some degree of stress at times, or maybe there's some areas that you have a passion for, whereas others like, well, you know, you kind of really have to push yourself a little bit harder to
Yeah,
to think yourself into
it's
it.
you know, the pace is different. You know, in the film industry, your projects and your challenges were often measured in weeks, maybe months, 3 weeks, 3 months.
Right.
You know, here it's, you know, years. It
Hmm.
still takes time.
Hmm.
And, you know, there is a certain level of kind of, you know, you have to manage that frustration, you know, because, you know, you coming from 20 years of things happening really, really quickly, and a high level of risk tolerance to working here. But I would say that, you know, the reward is, and what, you know, keeps me going on a lot of the stuff is, you know, the work that we're doing here and that I'm doing is, you know, the big difference is, for when I was in film production for the first half of my career, it was mostly about like, what is that current project doing for me?
Yeah.
Right, my career, my income, my mortgage, you know,
Right.
and such like that. And in this last half of the career, it's been more about what I'm doing for the industry, right?
Okay.
It's sometimes it's harder, it's more challenging. You got, you know, there's more hoops to jump through, and a lot more
Hmm.
stakeholders. But when you see, for example, like, you know, another city, another jurisdiction coming to us for, you know, for advice and saying that, you know, hey, you're doing a great job on this, you know that that's very rewarding, right?
Yeah.
And also, when, you know, you think about like the role that I have now is a lot about how do I make sure this industry is going to be surviving after, you know, I'm long gone, or
Yeah.
thriving after I'm long
Hmm.
gone. There's a
Hmm.
lot of reward to that, right? Yeah.
No doubt,
So
no
yeah,
doubt. And
yeah.
also too, I guess it's you're doing things on scale. So again, returning to
Hmm.
that point of, say, sustainability, if you're setting a policy where, okay, we're going to be phasing out diesel generators in X amount of years and going all electric, like that's a different level of reward as well, because you're
Yeah,
serving not only the industry, you're serving humanity at that
yeah,
point, you
yeah,
know, to be frank, right? I mean, to be honest. So yeah, I can totally see that, how there would be
yeah.
that
It,
extra
it's
level of, you know, incentive attached to it
hmm
all.
hmm
Nice, nice. I have this other question here actually, and it's something I shared off the top, which is a comment from you about how
hmm
this notion of a strong creative sector is really the heart of all great cities. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
hmm. You know, I read that somewhere a
Yeah,
long
I
time
love it.
ago,
Yeah.
and so I can't attribute the quote to
Okay.
anybody specifically. It's not my original. You know, I might have wordsmithed it a bit, since I made
Yeah.
my own words, but the
Yeah.
idea of it, came to me through something, and I wish I could remember what it was now, so long ago. And it just made me think. I'm like, what do they mean by this? And you know, anecdotally, just started thinking about and observing, you know, what are the great cities in the world,
Mm,
and you know, and is that true, right?
yeah.
You know, to kind of
Yeah.
test the
Yeah.
hypothesis. And you start to think about that, like in like Toronto and New York and London and Paris, and, you know, you
Hmm.
name it. There's always this creative energy, this vibrancy in the
Yeah.
communities that that trickles into everything, right? And
Hmm.
you know, the obvious parts are like film industry, arts, entertainment, music. You know, there's a lot of flow back and forth between those. But I
Hmm.
think it even goes in further to that. You know, we talked about, you know, tourism, for example,
Yeah.
and just, you know, how, you know, seeing a city on screen that's vibrant and exciting attracts people to come to it.
Hmm.
It you know, having a city that's vibrant, has a strong arts and culture community, attracts people that want to live there, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like, so a lot of that's kind of anecdotal. You know, but I would love to find some economic students, as university students, that would actually do like a study on, you know, global
Mm,
cities and the correlation between those two things, right? You know,
yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Be
I
fascinating.
I suspect it's a hypothesis that would be validated with data, but
I would think so.
in the meantime, it's observational for me, and I think that, you know, you know, your listeners, if they have the chance to kind of to think about it in their own cities, is there a correlation or not? There's certainly a reason why there's hundreds of film commissions
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
you know, in the world, maybe thousands, that are all
Yeah.
trying to attract the film industry, because they see that, that connection, right? How it has all those indirect impacts to a whole bunch of other sectors in the economy. So, yeah.
Yeah, nah, no doubt. I mean, it doesn't help, or it doesn't hurt, rather, the glitz and the glamour of it, and that attracts a lot of people into it. But then, like, also, like, these other points that are just a lot more practical, just the jobs themselves. Like you mentioned, like within your own family, people doing makeup, for example, or the directing, or this or that. I myself, when I was in my youth, I spent about 4 months in Vancouver, actually, and I was just a university student at the time, and I'd never been there, actually, at that point. I'm from Canada, but I'd never been to Vancouver and never lived there, no less. And the thing that struck me right away was just the scale of it. It kind of blew me away. I think I'd signed up for just some extra money, and just for the experience of like getting on set as an extra, just for fun, just for fun. And it just blew me away just how big it was. I mean, it was something I'll never forget, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's just sort of representative of this idea of just like the scale of it and what it can be and what it does represent to a lot of people, not only on the creative side, but where you're living right now and the business side of it as well. Vancouver has developed this reputation, and most certainly it's driving the image of that city forward in a lot of different respects, and it's around the world that are involved with film and television production. So I really like that. I really find that quite compelling. But well, I do have one last question, actually, in this segment, if you wouldn't mind, Geoff, and it's about you. I mean, in terms of your career right now, I mean, we've spoken to it, in terms of how you've kind of evolved into where you're at right now and what you're doing. But what does it come to represent for you? The career that you've had, and moving forward right now. Are there any particular rewarding moments or highlights along the way that you'd like to be able to really like to share?
I think we touched a little bit on it. Obviously, the rewarding part for me now is being able to kind of think about how my contributions will lead to something that might be like, I won't call it a legacy, but like a multi-generational impact, right? Here in the city, but also globally. I mean, the clean energy part of it is something that I'm really, really happy to be a part of, and proud to lead where in the areas that we can, because if Vancouver won't be successful in that particular project unless everybody else in the world comes along for the ride. And so, to your point earlier, it's like, if we succeed, that's going to mean that every other city in the world is going to succeed. Like, no one's saying, send us all your fossil fuel dirty productions, right? Everyone wants now the clean tech and stuff like that. So that's kind of one of the other accomplishment, actually, is not in my current role, but my previous role. Between leaving production and coming to the city of Vancouver, I ran a health and safety association called ACSAFE Safety Association. And that was my kind of transition out of the film industry into executive leadership. And when I took over the organization, it was a small organization with half a dozen staff, and offered some classes in the back room of a building downtown. And over the course of my time there, and working with the board and the industry representatives and such, we really transformed that organization. We moved it into a bigger office. We increased the staff and the budget, and we started offering a lot more health and safety training programs and courses, and really transformed it from essentially was a health and safety communications and newsletter with a little bit of training to an industry institution, where it's now like at the core of almost actually everybody that comes into the film industry is taking a course from them, and hopefully learning something that will save them from getting injured or worse on a film set. And so that, to me, that was actually also one of the things I'm really proud about in my career. And I watched that organization closely after I've left, to almost like a parent watching from afar, and so happy with the direction they're going in. And so I think those are kind of the two big. If I look back on my career, helping the industry get off the use of fossil fuels, and hopefully creating a healthier and safer work environment would be kind of the two big rewards for me.
One of those. So both of those not too shabby, either for you, to be honest. Like the fascinating thing to me is like they're both on scale. So like you said, I mean, they're affecting people, and scale on scale in terms of like a lot of people, and moving forward as well. People that are entering this industry are going to be affected by some of these policies and some of these things that you set up. And I can see how you most easily derive some degree of satisfaction from all of that. So yeah, well, I'm sure there's gonna be a few more things. You're certainly not done, and we'll keep an eye on those things as well. I'm
Yeah.
sure there'll be a bit more. Maybe we could shift over into this middle segment here, if you don't mind. Something called a water cooler story segment. And here I just ask guests to indulge listeners with a story related to the profession. So I'm really eager to hear what you have for us today.
I tried to get out of the film industry after 20 years. And an interesting bit of my career is I was trying to get out of production. I had seen I'd seen a lot of transferable skills in public relations, accounting, operations, project management, all those type of things. It was extremely difficult to do that. I applied for all kinds of jobs that I thought I was a perfect match for, and never got a call. And I was a film person, and I think one of the things that I had to realize was that I had spent 20 years from my 20s into my 40s in the film industry, developing the skill set. And when it comes to like career pathways, going back to that kind of pathway idea, is while that wasn't purposeful, it did kind of set the foundation of my value as a professional. And if I wanted to continue to excel and get value and be compensated also for what I did, it was all based on that knowledge and experience. And it was at that point in time that I kind of had that kind of epiphany moment, like you're not getting out.
You're embedded now.
You're not getting out. Like a lateral move is probably not going to work into another sector. So double down on stay in the sector, but what can you do differently? How can you find that? And I was really fortunate to be able to kind of make that transition, find that outside of production, especially in a city like Vancouver, where there are such an established industry, there are many roles that are outside of production. Within all the different industry associations, within government. We're seeing a lot of people, those people in my kind of age, where they're trying to get out of production, going into running facilities or leadership, like Clara moving into consulting and sustainability. Other peers that are going into running equipment rental houses. So they've it's nice to be able to see now that there are pathways out of production. But going back to the earlier point, is like if you're younger, there's this idea now that just do whatever you want in your 20s. It doesn't have any consequences. I would disagree. Like I think that your 20s and your into your 30s, do whatever you want, whatever you like, but know that those skills and those experiences will start to define your career in your 40s and your 50s. Like you can't go back and recapture that. So if you're going to learn something, make sure you learn it well, and expect that if you want to continue to move in that direction and advance, that you're going to have to rely on those things that you do in your 20s.
That's a really good point. Really good point. I think one that's worth considering for a lot of people. I had a guest on just last week, Latif Nasser of the WNYC Studios Radio Lab. I'm not sure you're familiar. It's this podcast, it's a radio program, broadcast around the world. And excuse me, he was talking about this point to a degree. And in terms of his path, at least initially, he had some interests, whether it be science, whether it be journalism, that he wanted to center himself around. And that's what he did. And then as his sort of career progressed, he was getting a little bit more cerebral about it in terms of, okay, well, where would I like to go with this? And it's kind of reminding me what you're speaking of right now too. Like early on, you had some varied experiences, but as you progress through your career, you begin to understand the industry perhaps better. You began to make connections. You had newer ideas that were coming on board that you could be a little bit more cerebral about it and be like, okay, well, this is, I think, where I would like to go now. So you had this sort of like broad-based sort of experience, it sounds like, in areas that you had some degree of interest in, and then things began to take shape. Am I onto something here? Is that kind of how it went?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, and the other aspect of that is I don't know if everyone experiences this or not, but when I was younger, I was restless. And I think why I was moving around a lot. I got some jobs out of my sales and marketing program, mostly in professional sales, and I was always the employee of the month in the first 3 to 6 months, and then I was either leaving or being walked out the door within the year, right? Because my motivation quickly dropped off, and I was very restless, and that's I think why the film industry provided me for a great 20 years, because it's very project based. Right?
Exactly.
And
the new thing,
yeah,
you'd hop on it. Yeah.
And that served me very well, because there was always change and variety, different people, different projects. And so a project-based work environment was great for my first 20 years. Interesting enough, the last 20 years, now I'm that's much less attractive to me.
Yeah.
and I'm attracted to things that have longevity, right? And as you said, bigger and bigger scope and bigger impact.
Yeah.
So in your career, you don't you might go through a couple changes like that in your lifetime, where you completely change, what it is the way you want to work. I just been fortunate. I've been able to change the way I want to work, but still stay in the same sector, right?
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, this talk of me is just we're flying through it, and I could ask you a billion more questions, but I'm conscious of your time. So we are heading into the very last segment here, Geoff, and it's a crystal ball segment. As the name implies, we're looking towards the future, usually trends, predictions, so on and so forth. And I'd like to return back to the city of Vancouver itself, in terms of its place within the film and television industry and moving forward. What developments, are exciting for you looking forward? What are some things that we should keep an eye on coming out of the city and within that industry?
Well, I think, we talked a lot about clean energy first. I think my hope is that we'll be the first city hopefully by 2030, where film productions can be made without ever running a diesel generator.
Wow.
And that's, that's not too far away. Yeah.
No, it isn't. Not at all.
I would, I think one of the areas that I think hopefully we'll start to see, and everyone's dealing with this, but I want to be able to work with the industry to find a solution as quickly as possible is on training and development. Everyone in every industry in the world's, how do you attract talent, right?
Yeah.
And we have about 25% increase in studio space coming online, being built right now in Vancouver. That's going to mean 25% more shows that need to go into, 25% more crew, and so that's a big challenge. So I think we're going to see a lot more focus on workforce and labor development. But with Vancouver, some of the unique aspects of Vancouver is kind of go back to our earlier discussion about what we're doing and why the areas we're progressive in is through diversity and inclusion, and through reconciliation with the First Nations. I think that there's some really, really interesting intersections of those opportunities, and including with sustainability. So, sustainability, it's all about, all those, the transformation of how you do business. Yeah. They all kind of intersect. And so as a city, I think we can support the industry a lot through those efforts, and again, continue to kind of be a leader. And then the other aspect is, kind of interesting, kind of the more exciting, nerdy part of it in a way too, is the technology the change that's going on. And, there's a lot of buzz right now. The latest thing in the film industry is virtual production. Okay. These stages where they have these LED screens, and they can put any environment you want in the background, and actors work inside of them. And they're I've been in them, and they're massive. And the stuff that you can do inside them is pretty incredible, from creating whole other worlds and sci-fi to being able to maybe put somebody on a mountaintop that would be normally really hard to get to. I saw a commercial for a company that does sporting gear, and it was all taking place with a conversation on a ski lift. Yeah. Right. So they just hung a ski lift in a stage and had this whole world around them. And so it's an exciting technology. It's it's advanced from the idea of the green screen or the blue screen, because you actually are in the environment. The actors can play off of it. Wow. It reflects in it reflects in the windows of a car or your glasses. You can see it. So it's very real. Wow. But what's really interesting about that to me is the current model for production is you have physical production, and then you have post-production. And those they're kind of for the most part siloed, right? And so you do your raw physical production, then you send it off, and post starts happening. Or it can be simultaneous, but they can be different parts of the world. Watch any film right now, and you see the visual effects production companies that one
Right.
film, and they're all over the world.
Right.
With virtual production, you move the post-production to pre-production. You have to create those worlds before you shoot them.
Okay.
And then when you're shooting them, you have this entire tech team in the behind camera that are running all the images and the angles and that. So you actually are bringing together the groups now that can't be siloed. They have to be in the same space at the same time. And so for cities where you have both a really strong production environment and a strong visual effects team or infrastructures, which we have in Vancouver, that transition will be a lot easier.
Yeah,
right.
And it's true opportunity, right?
You can't, a city that has one but not the other is going to struggle, I think, with this as it advances. So I'd say that would be an area where to really kind of keep an eye on. In a funny way, it's almost like a crystal ball, but it's going back to filmmaking. You know, in the early days when people had to paint, the backdrops, in the old westerns and stuff like that too, and they had the painted backdrop. Essentially, it's the modern version of the painted backdrop, but all the time is now being spent on creating it before you film instead of after. So I'm excited about where that goes. Yeah,
it's transformational. I used that word earlier, but I mean that really has the power to really shift that industry in a whole different sort of realm or sphere altogether. So being at the top of that and sort of witnessing this unfold and obviously trying to best position the city to take advantage of all of this, it must be an exciting opportunity to be involved with. So excellent. Well, I must say, Geoff, I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure. I myself I feel a bit selfish in saying this, but I feel like I've been learning tons and tons and tons. And I know listeners are going to be, walking away from this talk, armed with a whole bunch of additional insights and information concerning that industry as a whole and where maybe, they might be able to fit in or make an entry point into it all. So I can't thank you enough for your time and all of your insights. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, for those interested in learning more about Geoff and his work, of course, you can go check him out on LinkedIn. You can even reach out to him there, perhaps. And also, too, if you like today's show, I mean, please be sure to share. I think it goes a long ways, in terms of the discussion points that we brought up. It could be helpful to not only yourself, but to others. And also, you can rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. And head on over to YouTube. Within the last year, I did launch a channel over there where you can catch full video conversations, much like the conversation today that we had with Geoff. And the cool thing there is we'll have some imagery associated with the talk, so you can kind of take it on in a different sort of way. And then finally, too, don't forget to tune in to the next episode of Life as where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.